meeting to order at 6:31. Good evening, all. Skippy sign. Tonight's agenda is the Sing Shop sign. There'll be a quick discussion on that. We have permit inquiries, flood hazard regulations, regional future flood use map, EV charger station streetlight, and we'll review the minutes and have the administrative officer give a report. And we'll have public comment, and then if all things go well, we'll adjourn. So let's start with Susie and the question on the sign.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, just on my regular walk from home to the library a few weeks ago.
Okay, stop for a minute. Somebody, yeah, okay. Try again.
You either have to mute yourself or turn off your volume.
Turn up the volume.
Hi, Dave. We just started.
I think muting yourself might work because it's picking up through the owl.
Yeah, I am muted. I don't know what I'm.
And then turning off your volume. Because that's your computer is playing the volume and it's feeding back through the audio.
Echo. This issue. You go in this Zoom on you go more.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, so I think
We're not hearing each other anymore.
I think we're good.
Okay, go ahead,
Right.
Susie.
Hi, Dan. The lower corner of the new sign up at the Skip Mart, facing Route 100 is at my eye level. I'm 5'8.5". And it also overrides into the road area. My immediate concern for myself was I almost poked my eye out, but it's just a safety issue.
So am I correct that we're talking about, there's the sign and then there's something that they've hung onto it that's hanging down below the sign?
It looks like it's two different things. Yeah, the prices and then there's another sign,
And so which are we talking about, the big one or the hanging down part?
the hanging down part.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing. Pat, there's the main sign, and then they've hung another little thing on there that says, this is special for special customers or something, and it's very low.
I almost hit it with my truck.
Yeah, we've had people complain about it being in the way of cars as well. I didn't understand that was part of what you approved.
We don't have a regulation about how low a sign can go. We only have a restriction on 20 feet above the ground.
Right, but it seems to me that is an addition to the existing sign, as I see it personally, that hanging down, that additional piece.
Is that little piece?
That could be. The sign is erected on the same post as the old sign, but it's erected offset where the old sign was erected in the center of the sign. Now it's the post is on the edge of the sign and the sign goes outward from there.
And below the main sign is a second thing that hangs below it.
Which I'm not sure was on the building permit.
I think that's the issue.
So do we have a regulation to enforce to say that sign is too low? Because there's nothing in 2.6 sign standards that says that I can tell him that his sign is too low and he needs to take it down.
Is that little area between the base of that sign and the road, there's a line through there. Is that not technically sidewalk?
Yes.
It's,
If it is, then that could be considered an impedance to that in the walking area or whatever.
I'm not sure where the sidewalk is there.
Well, there's a line down through there and I'm not sure what it's supposed to delineate, whether it's,
Well, that's the
Roads
shadow line
being-
for Route 100. So the sidewalk wouldn't necessarily start right there. There is usually a space between that and the sidewalk, or maybe it does. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it just marks the edge of the road. So when you park there, you're to the left of it. Or right of it, depending on you're coming in.
yeah, there's a space wide enough for a vehicle between that line
Hmm.
and I guess the side of the highway.
Yeah, I mean,
I just wasn't sure what that line was to delineate. It's kind of a weird one. We don't see it anywhere else. I don't think. In the
yeah, I don't
village.
think the sidewalk's delineated there.
No,
no.
okay.
But if there were a sidewalk, that's
Mhm.
true.
That's where.
Yeah, you want to be as further away from the road as
I mean, it's
possible, you know.
difficult to have a sidewalk that's also.
Well,
parking
it's,
fine.
you know, if you connect the dots between the end of the sidewalk coming in front of the, you know, the hardware, the bookstore, cafe, and then onward to the park, if you connect those lines up. it's
How
pretty
about
much a
the
straight
bank?
through.
So if you raised the offset above, to 6 feet or higher, could that
Well,
solve the
there's,
issue?
7
there's a
feet.
limit to height. You can only go up 20 feet.
Yeah, but to get out of pedestrians, you only need to raise it, up to 8 feet or something.
I don't think we have any 7-footers in town, do we?
I think so.
I mean, without going and looking at the sign again, I honestly, I cannot visualize it. It's not something that
I was
can
just
bring
there and
up.
I can't visualize it.
Hey, Pat,
Yeah,
But I do know
Yeah.
the corner is at eye
Yeah.
level.
is there anything in our bylaws about how far the signs need to be from a public right of way?
it is supposed to be outside the right of way, which I believe, well, where the post is erected, it is.
But it hangs off of the post.
It
out
hangs
toward-
off of the post offset, so it's depending on which way you're looking at it, the post is towards the building and the pumps. And then the sign is erected from there out towards the road.
Yeah.
It's, the old sign was erected in the center of the post, so we're talking about 12 inches further out to the road is about what I'm estimating it is.
Mhm. Okay. So if we don't, well, let's hear from William Emmons there. He has got his hand raised.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you very much. Say, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I chair Two Rivers Regional Commission and I was given a Zoom link to join a meeting for mapping. Is this the same meeting
Yes.
or it is?
Right, you're in the right place.
Okay, I'll take my hand back down then. Carry on. Thank you.
Yep.
So if I approach the owner, I'm not quite sure what in the bylaws is going to represent what I'm saying. We don't have a minimum height for a sign, and it's on private property, so if somebody hits it with a car, Singh is going to be the one that is responsible for a sign or whatever, and if somebody walks into it and gets hurt, Singh will be the one to get sued and be responsible for that. So there's a little bit of, okay, Singh, you need to know that your sign is low. Should you recognize that and move it before someone conks their head on it and gets hurt?
I propose exactly that, Pat.
I don't know that I
you
could come to him
you
with
said-
any violation.
You said that it wasn't in the picture that he showed you. When I saw the piece hanging down, it was a surprise to me because it was not what we had understood. So I
Correct.
think maybe just saying that you've had comments from pedestrians who have had problems with it. I will add myself to the list. And we've had comments from people who've nearly hit it with their cars, that hanging down piece seems to be a problem.
And,
so-
I'll strongly suggest that he makes some type of change to it before he himself becomes responsible for someone's health.
Patty, this is Susie Smolin. You suggested I stop there and speak with him. I did go by there both weekends and did not connect with him, but I did leave a message with Jay, the gentleman that
Justin.
managed.
Justin,
Justin, he was listening seriously and he said he would definitely pass it on, but that's as far as I got. Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah,
Everybody.
I did hear that from you, yes. Okay, so noted, this is what I will do, and I'll let you know, well, I guess we'll see in the future if he takes it seriously or what he wants to do about it.
Thank you, everybody.
Watch where you're walking when you're going through town. That particular area as well.
Yes.
Dan, you're muted, Dan.
Moving on to our discussion about with Two Rivers, we have the flood hazard regulation that we're gonna have a presentation and discussion on. And then after that, we'll hear about the regional future land use map. Tonight is just an informational meeting for the planning commission to learn about what these things are. And we'll have a discussion at a later date about whether we engage with the flood hazard regulations or an ordinance or not. So Sandy, could you introduce our speakers there?
I would ask the speaker to introduce himself, please.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Hello, my name is Kyle Katz, and just before I introduce, can everyone see I've shared a screen on Zoom? The first slide says Rochester flood regulations. Just want to make sure everyone can see that.
We have it, I have it on the Zoom here, so
Great.
Dan, I assume you have it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure everyone can hear me on Zoom.
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay, so again, my name is Kyle Katz. I'm a regional planner with the Two Rivers Occoquechee Regional Commission. Work on a range of projects. I focus a lot on flood regulations, hazard mitigation, and also I'm working with Kyle, who's also here this evening on the regional future land use update, which we'll get to momentarily. But I believe Sandy reached out a few months back asking about they come and present on just a background in flood regulations, river corridors, what they are, how updates work to those, some of the benefits and drawbacks. So I'm going to give more of a broad overview and then kind of leave it open to questions and discussion down the road as to what if Rochester wants to pursue looking at an update to these or not. There's a lot going on right now throughout the state around flood regulations and river corridors. So there are a lot of things in motion right now, and we'll get into a bit of what's going on currently. So I'll get started. Just to start things off, flood regulations are a requirement to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. That is the federal program that started in the 1960s and allows towns to essentially allow for residents in towns to participate to apply for flood insurance. The regulations need to meet a minimum standard that's set by FEMA in order to participate. And some of the benefits include residents are eligible for flood insurance. You don't need to be in a designated flood hazard area to purchase flood insurance. But your town does need to participate in the NFIP. Future development in flood zones also must be built to safer standards than it would otherwise need to be built if you're not participating. This often means you're building the structures higher up, you're using certain materials that are more resistant to flooding and to the force of water. And all of this is in mind to help keep development safer and to lower costs down the road due to damage and things like that. And then the National Flood Insurance Program helps with ERAF. Now, ERAF, you may be familiar, is the Emergency Relief Assistance Fund. And that provides, following a federally declared disaster, each step that towns take toward ensuring or protecting development from hazards essentially gives the town credit within the Emergency Relief Assistance Fund. So in general, there's a 25% local match for public assistance funding following a disaster. But with each step the town takes, this match is lowered and the state takes on more of that match. And part of one of those primary steps is being in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Which we are.
Which you are, yeah, all towns in the Two Rivers region are in the NFIP. So improving flood safety starts with planning. So all of this starts with the town plan and the hazard mitigation plan, and outlining in the goals, policies, and recommendations, ways in which the town will protect development and protect its citizens from flooding. And so just looking at the town plan, there's a lot of great language in the flood resilience section of Rochester's plan around protecting residents and property from flooding. This first point is one of the policies: use sound planning practices to address flood risks so that Rochester's citizens, property, economy, and the quality of the town's rivers as natural and recreational resources are protected. So that's more of a broader policy statement. And the following two are recommendations from the flood resilience element of the town plan, and these are more specific. So, quote, limit permitted land uses within Rochester's river corridor areas to non-structural outdoor recreational and agricultural uses due to the dangerous risk in these areas. And, quote, revise Rochester's flood regulations to reflect the policies in this chapter. So those are talking about two different areas, essentially. In that first point, the one about limiting permitted land uses within the river corridor areas, let's talk about within a mapped river corridor. The second point is looking at areas within the special flood hazard area. And those are two different maps, two different areas. There's a ton of overlap between them, but the regulations are a little different. And we can talk a little more about that. So just looking at your regulations right now, that it has some strengths that go above and beyond the minimum FEMA requirements. There is a certificate of occupancy requirement. This essentially means that the zoning administrator or administrative officer goes and checks the development and makes sure that it aligns with what was permitted. The permitting requirements in flood hazard areas are very strict. So ensuring that whatever got permitted was built to those specifications is very important. Because if you say you're going to build something to a certain elevation and it's 5 feet below that, well, that's a problem in a flood hazard area. It also prohibits salvage yards in the special flood hazard area. This may seem like a small thing, but when you have lots of materials and appliances and maybe cars and things that are kept externally in an area that's prone to flooding, all of that is liable to wash away and potentially damage property downstream, or if there are chemicals involved, leaking pollutants into the waterway. And then requires, the bylaw currently requires structures to be elevated 1 foot above base flood elevation. And you'll see this simple graphic on the right-hand side. Now, base flood elevation, or BFE, is the minimum requirement that FEMA sets. A structure's first floor needs to be at that point. So that essentially means that the door to your house on that first floor is right about where that base flood is going to be. It doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room if you get a bigger flood. And we see that pretty often. You know, there's just down the hill from our office is a structure that is built at base flood elevation, and in Irene, it flooded by 2 feet. So that gives an idea of the potential severity and the extent to which it can flood more than that base flood. So we often recommend going up to 2 feet. So possible improvements. One big improvement would be to prohibit net fill. Now, I think net fills, and the concept of it is essentially, and I'm going to borrow a term from our chief planner, it's like adding bricks to a bathtub. And if you think the bathtub is your floodplain, and that's your storage capacity, and each brick is a new development, that water has to go somewhere. It's getting displaced elsewhere. That brick is that net fill. If you're not creating more floodplain elsewhere, that water is getting pushed to other development, potentially putting other property at risk. So yeah, one potential improvement is just not allowing for net fill. This doesn't mean that you can't use fill. You just need to compensate everything you bring in, you take out an equal amount. And then increasing, as I said, elevation floodproofing to 2 feet of freeboard. Freeboard is essentially the term in flood regulations for going above that base flood elevation minimum standard. So you'd have 1 foot of freeboard or 2 feet. It's how far above you go above that minimum. Another option would be to prohibit new residential and commercial structures entirely in the special flood hazard areas. This is something that towns in our region do. It's a discussion worth having. And that prevents a lot of potential development from maybe getting flooded in the future.
Residential and commercial, so that does not include outbuildings.
It does not include accessory structures. Though accessory structures aren't really a priority in the National Flood Insurance Program. They're not, so those don't need to be elevated, essentially. They're not lived in, they're not used for commerce.
Are they covered?
They're not covered by insurance, no. They do need to be built to withstand the flood water and the velocity and the force of the water, but they don't need to be built to a higher elevation. And then require critical facilities to be located outside of the special flood hazard area. Another requirement could be, instead of not relocating, but having new critical facilities outside this area, would be to, if a critical facility is substantially damaged, that when you build it back, you need to build it back higher up. So saying maybe build it back to 3 feet above the base flood elevation. If it got whacked by a flood.
What's a critical facility?
It would be like an emergency building,
Like
fire
our power
department,
station down by the ball field.
power
maybe.
station, yeah. Yeah, the kind of
They did
anything
raise that
that,
up when they,
No, we didn't.
oh, it didn't, no?
You wanted your power back.
Well, yes,
No, we actually had to get another site in order to get it rebuilt. We had to commit to another site up by the leach field.
Kyle, I have a
any
question.
of this. Yes,
You know, the special flood hazard area, the terms kind of often confuse me. is that synonymous with the 100-year flood elevation?
It is, yeah. And within floodplain mapping, the FEMA also will map the 500-year flood zone, but that's not typically included in regulations. It can be, but most towns just go for the 100-year, which is the minimum requirement, is that 100-year flood zone.
Okay, thanks.
So what was Irene characterized as?
Probably depends on where you were. I know in a lot of parts of the region it was a 500-year flood, and so that's where, you know, we had this development kind of down the hill from us that they were built at base flood elevation for where they were, but Irene was 2 feet above that, and you know, that's what happens if you build at the minimum within the 100-year flood zone, because if you get a 500-year flood, that water is higher up than, you know, whatever that base flood elevation is, and so you should be building higher to accommodate for that. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of moving parts right now when it comes to flooding and flood legislation, river corridors. So the Flood Safety Act, which is Act 121, was passed in 2024 by the state legislature. And it essentially implements permitting of river corridor regulations across the state. This is not started yet. But the Department of Environmental Conservation, by I believe 2028, will be taking over the permitting and regulation for river corridors across the state. And here's where I'll get into a little of the nuance and how river corridors and the special flood hazard area differ in terms of regulations and what's really being looked at. So you recall the image of the house, that simple image for the house being elevated. The special flood hazard area really just looks at elevation. That's the most important factor. How high up are you? Are you above where that flood, we think that flood is going to be? And river corridors look more at, well, where does the river have propensity to move? Where is it likely going to move over time? And will there be development that's susceptible to erosion and undercutting? Will that development need protection in terms of armoring later on down the road? And so here you can see, I've taken, there's a house, there's a development in Randolph that is going through a buyout process. And I've taken images from 2003, 2016, 2023. And in 2003, you see that the red shading, that's all the river corridor. Unfortunately, we don't have a digital flood hazard area map for Orange County. So we just have the river corridor map on here, but you can see where that river corridor is. And in that 2003 map, you see a small red line, which indicates the driveway. Is everyone able to see that? I can point it out. So this red line here is the driveway. And then in 2016, we see, okay, that's where the driveway was, but the river is actually cutting into it here. So they moved it over here. And then by 2023, the river had completely passed where that first driveway was and was undercutting the second driveway. And at that point, there was no other place to put a driveway, and the buyout process begins. But it gives an excellent visual of how the river can change just between in a 20-year time period.
The white line, is that the
white line
is that the main part of the river that we're seeing there?
That's the
the,
Um,
no, okay.
the white line is the 2023 river
Yes,
as it
okay,
flows.
Okay, yeah,
And
yeah.
the,
okay.
so you see from the green to the white, that change over time from 2003 to 2023. And it's
Okay,
now at the point where
okay,
part of the river is outside the special flood hazard area entirely. Because the FEMA flood maps were made in the 80s, and
right.
that's a significant level of movement. And so that's the big difference between flood regulations and river corridor, is that looking and trying to account for that last. Okay, and then we have also going along, new FEMA flood maps in the works. They've been in the works for a few years now. We expect the new maps to be published for Windsor County, maybe the summer of 2027. And so, you know, there's still a year or two down the road, and a lot can happen in between. But most of these maps don't have new studies attached to them. They will be more detailed though, because we have better base level engineering and more refined contour level data. So instead of the 20-foot contours that the earlier maps used, we're looking at 1-foot contours. And so you can see that on the top is that current FEMA map for Vernon, Vermont, which is, we really only have a couple of preliminary maps out, and they're way down south at the southern edge of Vermont. And the team is kind of working their way up from there. But the current FEMA map, you see it's very flowy. The blue up there is that's the A zone. And then the hatching, the red hatching is the floodway. And then you see that same area down on that lower image, the preliminary draft FEMA map, and you see it's much more edgy and specific. And some areas that are in the current map are not in the preliminary draft, and that's due to that using that 1-foot contour data that can give you a higher level of detail than you'd otherwise get. So next steps when it comes to flood regulations, you can look at making improvements to the flood hazard area regulations. You can look at adopting river corridor regulations. And Two Rivers has funding to assist with drafting and provide technical assistance in that process. We can support holding hearings and getting the hearings noticed and warned. We work closely with the DEC floodplain managers, especially when it gets close, when we have a draft that's more or less ready for a hearing. We take it to the floodplain managers, they run it through a checklist just to make sure that we're not missing anything critical. And the entire process can take 1 to 2 years. It can be faster. It really depends on how the complexity of what the changes that are being made, and the amount of public engagement that happens, how many hearings are held, and then after hearings, if changes are considered and made, that can all lengthen the process. But essentially between the largest amount of time is in drafting, and then you can go through 2 to 6 months probably between the planning commission hearing and the select board hearing. And there are some useful links that I've provided up at the top here. The first link just gives some more background on the rollout of the new FEMA maps, and there's a timeline for when those maps will come out across the state. The Department of Environmental Conservation Municipal Assistance page has a bylaw template that you can look at. It has a river corridor template language that you can look at as well. One thing to consider, Rochester's flood regulations are integrated into the zoning. So it's not as though it would be adopting just a standalone ordinance, although I guess you could. It would just be the separate standalone document, but towns go either way with that, integrating everything into the zoning or keeping the flood regulations or the corridors separate. I've linked our About Floods page. It's got a number of useful links right at the top for different flood related pages. Then the Flood Safety Act itself, the legislation, if anyone's so inclined to read through that. And then the Vermont A&R Atlas is a great place to review the flood hazard areas and the river corridor areas in town. Fortunately, being in Windsor County, both of those are digital. So you can see how the river corridors overlay with the flood hazard areas and get a sense for how similar and or different they are throughout town. And with that, I'd like to maybe bring it all back to you guys and if there are any questions right now, but you know, before we dive into the regional future land use
I
presentation.
have a question for you, Kyle. This is Dan. In this slide, in the red block, FHA bylaw drafting, is FHA used to describe both the river corridor areas as well as the special flood hazard areas?
Yeah, so I put in FHA, but yeah, it could be both flood hazard area or river corridor, or both. Because often they're developed in tandem at the same time because they can be integrated into the same document.
I think what we think about in Rochester is a lot of our outlying areas outside the village and outside really the main part of the White River that is in the 100 or higher floodplain. A lot of the areas in the tributaries, which are more likely to have you know, the erosion factor, the river corridor impacting a lot more properties.
Yeah, and that's one, I mean, I didn't mention this, but adoption of the river corridors could increase the ERAF share that the state would kind of take on following a federally declared disaster. So most towns are paying maybe 12.5%, and the state is covering the other 12.5%. If a town adopts river corridor regulations, it boosts it lowers the town share to 7.5% and increases the state share.
And that
So-
those if those projects you're talking about, the state share, federal share, are those for municipal infrastructure or structures, or is that also assistance to private property owners?
I believe it's just public assistance, so it would be municipal infrastructure, municipal buildings, it'd be roads. Yeah, essentially more public facilities.
So we have what we were told were adequate rules to satisfy the federal, to satisfy FEMA. We did not revise them in our most recent review because they were about to redo the maps. I guess I'm unclear if we wanted to just, if we wanted to go with river corridor and try to get that extra 5%. What kind of cut and paste are we talking about, or are we talking about really redoing the whole thing? And should we wait for the new federal maps?
I don't know if waiting for the federal maps is all that important, especially since the Code of Federal Regulations isn't changing. So the underlying code that requires towns meet a certain minimum standard, that's not changing. What might be more important is what the state does in the next year with, as a result of Act 121, the Flood Safety Act. My understanding is that the state will be setting its own minimum standards for flood hazard areas. And whether those differ and by how much from the FEMA minimum, it, remains to be seen. And I don't think that it would be drastically different. I could see maybe requiring 1 foot freeboard instead of that base flood elevation. Like that would make sense. It's not too radical a step. But I just don't know. We don't have enough information, and that's something I believe is probably getting hashed out over the next year. So it might be worth waiting for more information on that, just to see what the state will require as a minimum, and if that's different or not from what FEMA is.
Some of that we may already have.
Well, you did say at the beginning of your presentation that we've already required our houses to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation, so.
Yeah, there might be other areas in which the state puts in what's called a higher standard, which is, it's more restrictive than what FEMA has set.
Mhm.
And whether Rochester has done that or not,
Remains to be seen.
Remains, yeah, I don't have a crystal ball for what.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
It seems like at this point, it would be difficult if we took this idea of river corridor bylaw to the community, but we don't quite know what the state is going to do with it. It's a little premature to offer it to the community without knowing. But as you say, that may happen over the next year, and it might be in time for our public involvement, but we'd have to consider that, whether it's really ripe for discussion, I guess.
And I mean, you can always begin working on, an update to the flood hazard area regulations. You can begin working on, looking at river corridors, because it does take time. And, down the road, if revisions do need to be made, it could be worth starting, in the next 6 months or a year. It will be technically a little more challenging, I think, because the flood hazard regulations are incorporated into the zoning, and so there's some kind of looking into, okay, where are these? Are the regulations spread out through the entire zoning document, or is it all located within this one space? I've seen where it's kind of all over the map and you're having to hunt for the right information that you need. And there's some of it on page 10 and then some other section on page 120. And so it can get a little messy, or it can be messier than if it's just a standalone. But when it's integrated, I don't recommend taking it out, just because already gone through the work of incorporating it into the single zoning document. It's easier for the zoning administrator to just focus on one document than remember there's a second one. So yeah, I see Pat has a question.
Hi, you mentioned that this could be monitored by either zoning or a separate entity. What do you mean by a separate entity? The select board, or would there be a special flood board? How is it handled when it's done separately?
It's still so the zoning administrator is still responsible for administering the flood hazard regulations. What is changing by 2028 is that the permitting for river corridor areas is shifting to the Department of Environmental Conservation. And so they will be taking on the management of the permitting for that. I was also talking about how you could have a standalone flood hazard area document, a bylaw that's outside of the zoning and is still zoning and is still enforced by the zoning administrator.
So there probably would be another sheet to a building permit regarding flooding. Can we just right now have a question, is it in the flood zone? It's up to the zoning administrator to determine whether it needs to go to the state or not, or we'll just know that in 2028.
You'd probably flag it and, kind of like with wetlands, you'd say, oh, looks like you're close to you're in the river corridor, go talk to the Department of Environmental Conservation, or, oh, you need a wastewater permit, go talk to the state wastewater folks. So it'd be kind of like just sending people to the right
Okay.
entity.
Yep, thank you.
Do we have other questions? I think the thing that we need to do is look at the overlap of the two maps is sort of the next step for us. Is to see what property would be
Is
pulled
impacted.
in
With the river corridor.
if we went to River Corridor. So that's
So,
that's homework that we
whether
can
or
do.
not we go to river corridors, by 2028, somebody else is gonna be saying something about it.
In the meantime, we can look at the maps. Okay.
And if
Well,
I,
that was
if
the
I
whole
get
point of it, how
information
much of our little canyon that we live in here gets affected by that?
Yeah,
We
and,
don't have a lot of space, so it's.
Yeah.
The tightest valleys.
no, and that's something I'm intrigued by as well, because there are towns in our region that already have river corridor regulations on the books, and do they keep them? Does the state take over? I think it's more of a question I need to float to the folks at A&R. I don't know if it's all been worked out how it will happen yet or not. So.
Stay tuned.
And now Kyle and I'm also Kyle.
Kyle.
We're up.
Thank you, Kyle, for that.
Yep. Share my screen again, kind of bums me off the Zoom sharing, but. Take it away, or? Sure. Okay, I can almost chime in.
Stands, that's the best.
Yeah,
I guess this works here. All right, so I'm Kyle Hansen, Kyle Katz, of course, is on. If you ever got both Kyles in the office on the
we
regional
do it to
land use
confuse you.
mapping. Yeah, so you don't forget our name. So, okay, at least one of us is a Kyle. So we were here tonight to also talk about the process of making these new regional future land use maps, and then we'll show a draft map after this presentation. Should be like half an hour or so, and then any questions, of course, we're here to answer them. Any questions or comments? So, and of course, this is due to the Act 181 bill that was passed last year, which is just a Act 250 update and housing focus bill. So, go for the next slide. Yeah, went over the agenda briefly there, just. So here's the timeline that we're looking at with this process. We're starting middle of 2025, so we're gonna be meeting with all 30 towns in our region. Doing meetings just like this. And then the end of the year, we're hoping to wrap up our preliminary meetings by November of 25, but if secondary meetings need to take place with towns, if more questions come up, if we have to redraw some of the draft maps, if there's changes anywhere, we have a little bit more time until early 26. But we're hoping to have everything wrapped up the mapping side by mid 2026. And then hopefully the new regional feature land use map will be adopted by the board December of 2026. So we have a little bit more than a year and a half at this point. So whatever is talked about tonight is not final. There's plenty of time to modify as needed. So we're a regional planning commission, of course, and in a lot of those instances, that means we're planning at a regional level. When it comes to these regional featured land use maps, we're looking at how do areas cross town lines. So we're not just looking at the villages, we're looking at forest blocks, we're looking at wetlands, we're looking at rivers, how areas might, as nature does not follow geographic or political boundaries, we want to make sure that there is participation from the town. So we want citizen participation at all levels of the planning process. So we're here tonight to give this presentation. But that also means that the decisions shall be made at the most local level possible, commensurate with their impact. So we can have town-based land use maps like Rochester has, like every other town has, that might not be 100% in alignment with the regional maps, and that's okay, because each town has their own priorities and their own needs and interests. So the region might be too small to show, but it might show on a regional map. And we'll explain that further when you get to the map. Then the use of resources and the consequences of growth and development, region and the state. So some things are state-led and mandated, and some things are more bottom-up, some things are more top-down when it comes to planning. And this is a state mandated task that we have to do for Act 91. So this process of making a regional feature land use map is hoping to have a statewide feature land use map. So we're doing our 30 towns, Rutland will do theirs, Chittenden will do theirs, and so on and so on. We're hoping to have these maps as consistent as possible statewide. So not only are we meeting with the towns, we're working with the land use review board and the state. So we have the two different levels that we're working with. So of course, we have to be consistent with the state goals. And there's two different goals that the state's really pushing forward these maps. The first one is housing, which is maintaining the historic settlement pattern of compact villages and urban centers separated by rural countryside. So we want to think about where we're putting these housing units, and we'll get to the housing targets in a little bit. Each town is going to get one. Some are small, some are larger. But we want to make sure that we have these more dense, walkable villages that are more in alignment with the historic nature of Vermont. Settlement patterns, we don't want the sprawl, we don't want suburbia. And that same process, the second goal is to protect the long-term viability of ag and forest lands. And that's why we want to keep rural densities lower. We don't want to expand the villages if they don't need to be. So when we get to the map, we'll show that compared to our current regional feature land use map, the village areas will be a little larger to accommodate the housing targets, but they'll only be as large as absolutely necessary to achieve the housing targets and to have a little more commercial here and there if desired. And then we're gonna have 3 rural areas as opposed to 2. Right now we have our forest-based resource area, which is the green area, and then our rural general, our rural residential, which is our white area. In our map, we're gonna have a third, which is our forestry and ag. And these names were given by the state, and we're just applying them to a map. And that's more of an in-between, so we can still have housing. Of course, you can have housing all 3. But it's gonna be at a little lower density than your rural general, but a little more dense than your rural conservation, which is our forest-based resource area. And we'll get to that a little bit too. So yeah, of course, the village areas and village centers will be larger than they are currently. But those rural conservation forest-based resource areas will be shrunken a little bit to accommodate that in between, taking a little bit from each of our rural areas to make it clear. And policies from a Two Rivers perspective will be basically the same between the rural conservation and the forest-based resource, rural general, villages to villages. There won't be much change on our end. It's just another color added to the map that has slightly different. An in-between area is the biggest change. And of course, these new areas will not impact single-family dwellings. This is basically just a map for Act 250 purposes. So here's a little image of what the areas generally look like on the ground. So downtown center is the most dense, and Rochester does not have a downtown center. Obviously, you think, you know, it's not Church Street, Burlington, but in a region, this would be like White River Junction. And then it gets a little less dense, village centers, which you will have, and then village areas, which are more for the towns that have larger residential neighborhoods that are purely residential, that have water, wastewater, like all the boxes. And then that's more of your external neighborhoods. Hamlets are their own kind of thing. They are rural general, but they are a designated settlement that could become a village if necessary, or in the future if it does see more growth. But it's not something that we're pointing out as a place that a lot of new housing should or has to go to reach the state housing targets. Because really what we are looking for is about 55% or more of new housing units going in one of these areas, or a transition area, or any of the other settlement areas. But these are the main three. On the other side, we're looking at our rural areas. So kind of your rural general, a little less dense, your ag and forestry, and then your rural conservation is your open forest lands, state lands, federal lands, large wetlands, stuff like that, that could be already conserved, could have higher conservation value if it's not currently conserved. So yeah, when we're developing these village centers, these settlement areas, we're looking at a few different factors. We're looking at the flood-prone areas and wetlands. So we're using Chelsea as an example because Chelsea went first, and they said we could use them as an example for all the towns in the region. So in Chelsea, of course, the river corridor runs right through their village, which of course affects where the new housing can go. But then they have the steep slope issue. We also look at where the natural boundaries of these valleys are and think, okay, how can the village expand to best accommodate new housing without putting new housing in the floodplain or on really steep slope? And then our third factor is infrastructure. So does the town have water or wastewater or both? If it does, you can allow for more density. If it doesn't, of course, you need to think about expanding a little bit. And Chelsea luckily has wastewater, so they can have a little higher density. So the tight valley doesn't affect them as much as a town that didn't have it. So for their case, we really just took the existing village, current regional future land use map, and then made it a little large, kind of widened it, stretched it a little bit, more fit to parcel boundaries to make it fill the valley a little bit more. And this is the state designated village center, which in this new map and because of state policy, this all red area will have the same policies as this. And if you want to explain a little about you.
Yeah, so the village center designation is kind of gone away. And it's been absorbed into the new village area. And so the credits associated with like the the tax credits for renovations and things like that for commercial structures is still around. It's just in this broader area, and so it allows for more possibility for structures that fell outside of this small area to then, you know, receive those credits.
So that's a big
benefits.
issue for us because our village center is really quite concentrated. Is this gonna be an automatic extension or do we reapply to get it bigger or what's the process gonna be?
The process, my understanding is it's just getting the map and the regional plan approved through the land use review board. And the towns that already have the village center designation, they keep it. It's not gone, and it just becomes the village center.
But
in-
very specifically, let's say I'm interested in the house that's next door to our village. Because we're working on housing and this, and those lines are actually quite difficult for us right now. For all of the tax credits and all of that stuff. So I'm interested in the house that's right next door. How hard is it gonna be to get that house, to get that line moved? Are we talking about a 3-5 year process or is this something that's automatic? What?
My understanding now is that it would involve updates to the regional plan and the regional future land use map.
So we wait for your process to be done and then okay,
Yeah, so by that end of
okay,
26, early 27,
Yeah,
that's when the villages would be
okay.
finalized after the LURD with land use review board would sign off on our map. So now housing targets. So this is also included in Act 181, where every town would have a housing target that is basically what the state did is they gave each regional planning commission a number for the region. So you have to reach those housing targets. We don't have to, but they want us to reach the housing targets of each region. It's a goal. It's a ambitious goal in some cases, but it's a goal nonetheless. And we want to make sure that we took those housing numbers and applied them fairly to each town, which we took the population, each town proportional to the region. We divvied up the numbers of the housing units proportionally, and then if a town had water or wastewater and a highway exit, we gave them an extra 15%. If they had one or the other, the number that was proportional broke even. And if they had neither, they lost 30%. Because Hartford skewed the numbers so much, to make it even, you had to do a 15 and a 30. So that being said, the villages are going to be planned to accommodate the substantial majority of the housing targets.
Do you know what our number is?
Yes, so that being said, we took-
Drum roll.
Yeah, drum roll. We decided against doing a single solid number because we felt like that didn't allow for a lot of flexibility. So the state gave us a high end and a low end number. So we made a proportional number for the low end and the high end, and then we made that into a range, rounded to the nearest 10. So Rochester's is 50 to 70 for housing units. Units, because the majority of them are ideally, the hope was apartments or duplexes, stuff like that. So not new structures that many, but housing units, and that's more or less what the goal is.
In the
That's a
village.
lot.
in
Not just the
village.
village, that's the
Not
town.
just the village.
The town,
In the entire
55%
town.
has to be, not has to be, but is planned for in the village. The 55% is our substantial majority.
And this is over what time frame? 10 years?
Those are by 2030.
That's why it's ambitious.
It's very ambitious.
So
There is a 2050 number, but
you said 50 to 70, so we're looking at like 25 to 30 in the village itself?
A substantial majority, so if we're looking at the high end, it would be closer to 40 in the village
In the
by
village, it's a
2030,
lot,
yeah.
How many units do we have now? Do we know?
Mm. We can find that out, but we don't know
Mm.
tonight.
Yeah, the
These
Census
are
Bureau
proposed
calculates it.
additional to existing.
just in units.
Ah,
Mhm.
All right.
All right, well.
Existing.
Okay.
Yeah, let's get to work. So this is kind of a rough sketch of what a town could look like under our current regional future land use map. We have a forest-based resource, a rural general, and then our villages. And then again, as I was saying,
Villages are orange.
so if the two areas become three, this will kind of be what happens. So we take a little bit from rural general, a little bit from the forest-based resource. We make the rural ag and forestry areas, and then the forest-based resource, just it gets renamed to rural conservation. But the policies are the same. So this is like an in-between area that's primarily focused on areas with large concentrations of farms, either current use farms, conserve farms. If it's a large farm on the satellite imagery, but it's not showing up in our database's current use, we'll include it because of the land use layer in our mapping software. Or if I see a bunch of cows standing in the middle of a field, I'm assuming that's probably a farm. So there's a few different categories. We're also looking at forest, highest priority forest blocks when we're making these. We'll get into that with the map. So if it's not the highest priority forest block, but it's still a high priority forest block, and it has farms, this and that, we want to take it out of the rural general just to keep it a little less broken up, especially when it comes down to housing developments, like 10 or more units. Just to keep the forest block and the connectivity blocks a little more protected in those fringe shoulder areas that wouldn't be in the rural conservation.
I'll just add on, Kyle, that often these rural conservation areas, these tend to be the most remote, least accessible, and are typically the largest parcels. You get to the rural agricultural and forestry, parcels are maybe smaller, it's more broken up. You might probably have some more residential interspersed. And then rural general, it's much more a scattering, you still have hay fields and some farms, but there's much more residential in the rural general.
So we already have 1/3 of our acreage is owned by the National Forest.
Hmm.
So that seems to me by definition is rural conservation.
Correct.
So
And
does
that's the forest.
that just? Well, I guess that's gonna skew the map a little bit, or is it?
Yes, your map will look a little more green because of the national forest and the ridge line
Okay.
on that side as well. But yes, anything that's most like, there's a lot of farms, it's gonna probably go into the ag and forestry. And of course, there's residential in all three areas because that's just the way that development has existed. If there's a rural conservation surrounding a small few homes here and there, and there's a long gap, we like to kind of smooth the map to make it better at a regional scale.
It doesn't
So,
impact those homes at all.
It doesn't.
Whether they're in or out, yeah.
It doesn't change existing properties at all. This is just for you're coming with an Act 250 permit, you want to build 10 or more housing units, then this will come in and affect you at that point. But single family homes and existing homes, this does not change that at all. So when we're looking at the rural areas, we look at the parcel sizes, an existing forest, on large parcels. So if it's highest priority forest block, if it's a highest priority connector, if it's national forest lands, obviously, but those are the highest priority connectors and forest blocks. Conserved and current use parcels also falls into general forestry. And then if it's a state or federal protected land, rural conservation. And then forest blocks and large wetlands will determine. It'll usually go down to one step lower. So if it's a rural general and has a large plot and it's connected to ag and forestry, the wetland will get brought into ag and forestry. If it's in ag and forestry and it's bordering rural conservation, it'll get dragged to rural conservation, just because large wetlands are a priority to protect. They have high conservation value. But there are large wetlands that are in rural general, and there are wetlands that are in rural conservation, because the part of the smoothing and making the maps make sense on a regional scale will. These are all indicators that we can do on a checklist, but that doesn't guarantee that it'll go yes or no. We want to make the maps make sense when you look at them from an outside perspective. Have any other questions so far? Yes,
On your slide, you mentioned infrastructure.
correct.
Why was it limited to just water and sewer and not electricity wasn't added on? Can the substations power all these extra units in these towns?
So the hope is that if there is an issue with capacity, that capacity can be expanded. That's wastewater capacity. There are some towns that would need to increase their wastewater capacity. Electricity is an issue. The hope is this is a future planning goal. We're thinking, okay, this isn't a mandate. We're hoping in the future, we could build these many housing units here. If that means needing a grant to expand capacity, that's not guaranteed yes or no, we don't know. The hope is to make maps that could allow for the housing. So in the case of electricity, the hope is that yes, capacity would increase as the number of housing units increase. But that's not on us to say you can or can't, it's just you could theoretically.
Yeah, I was just interested in why you mentioned water but not electricity, or you mentioned septic
And
I was just.
well,
why-
so water and wastewater, that's more of a density
Mhm.
thing. So you can pack 5 units per acre pretty easily if you have water, wastewater. If you don't have the water infrastructure, we're looking at like 1 unit per acre. We're gonna be looking at how many housing units can go into a village. So that's mostly how further beyond the existing village would you need to go if density doesn't allow for it.
And this does get a little into the Home Act 47, which was 2024, 2023, that set the minimum density in areas that have sewer and water to 5 units per acre. And so we're saying, okay, well, if that is our state mandated minimum, looking at, because we have both of these utilities in place, what can we do? And what if, for example, there is a constraint? So what if we say maybe 50% of the land we can't do anything with? Can we still make the target? So we're looking at a very conservative estimate of based on, the land available. And even if we were to have it, could we still meet the housing target threshold?
Well, if you're meeting the threshold or a target, and you had one map that showed a bigger Chelsea, a bigger area. So let's say Chelsea by 2030 was designated to have maybe 40 new units by 2030. Then the idea then is to approach the landowners in that bigger area to allow for more units. What's the next step in getting there?
Excellent question. Our step is ensuring that there is area to meet the targets. The targets really only, there are many other factors at play in terms of like, why aren't housing units getting built? Is it a funding issue at the state and federal level because at this point, sometimes it's more expensive to build a house than it is to sell it. Because of the costs that go into just getting the house off the ground. And there's also a labor shortage that is making it very difficult for enough homes to be built fast enough. And there's also just a tendency to build more single family. And that's just kind of how it's always been in Vermont, is lower density residential. And we probably need more duplexes, quads, these higher density buildings for infill. that's much more market driven and requires other levers outside of planning to really spur the housing to be built. Yeah, we can have a number, but the number doesn't get us there.
So how much do you take, I mean, is this purely the modeling, when you develop the targets, are they purely land use based? And did you take economic activities, socioeconomic conditions in a community? I mean, because that's one of the challenges here, right? There aren't jobs close by. Land's not going to be developed. I mean, you can put housing up, but people, I'm just wondering how sophisticated that modeling was, and it's one thing to have. If Rochester was 2 towns over from Burlington and not 45 minutes from nowhere, I mean, that's one of the challenges here.
Mhm.
I mean, just popping houses up. You gotta have buyers, you gotta, I think, we have a little bit of a shortage here, but I'm just wondering if you took other considerations, both socioeconomic and economic activity.
Well, I think it was mainly whether you have the utilities, so water and wastewater, and then highway access.
Because a lot of the towns along the highways are gonna be more commuter towns for Dartmouth, where a lot of the jobs are.
You said you used the word exit. Were you talking about very specifically about interstate access?
Yes.
So we should be a lot of negative points on that then.
You broke even
It
because
evened
you have
out.
the infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
While towns to the north and south do
So-
not, so.
We don't have a wastewater treatment, we're septic based.
Mhm.
And I think if you talk to the sewer and water guy, he would tell you, we don't have infrastructure to support, in particular in the village, to continue to build out without significant investment.
Leach fields and,
Yeah. I mean, that's, to your
Yeah.
point, there's so many variables town by town. I would just, they have water, they have sewer.
And I mean, we're looking at a much higher level. Understanding that. Get it by 2030, getting to this housing target it's a very, very slim probability. Unless there was some state level lever that incentivized new home development.
Right.
That actually put money behind it and was able to, streamline permitting for a type of design that's like a modular home that you could buy in bulk and lower the cost. And so all of this is outside the scope of what we can do.
Because those are all unknowns, so we're planning for the hope for potential future growth in case it happens.
you're identifying where maybe things could go
Yes.
And we're also saying,
when need arises.
exactly, it's a conservative estimate. We're not saying, if you have infrastructure, the state minimum is, it's great. We're saying, well, what if you can't do that? What if you can do half of that? Could you still make it? Because you might have steep slope on a part of the parcel. You might have a small portion of it that runs through the floodplain. Like that's all stuff we're not accounting for. We're not, we're not considering that as buildable.
I'd like to know if you have it in your minds. Where is the buildable area in this example
In Chelsea.
in Chelsea?
Chelsea, this
Right.
is, there's a couple of large parcels down here.
Beacon Hill.
Oh, you can't see my mouse.
So the southern end of town,
There's a-
across
Yeah,
110 from
Mhm.
the river, and then there's also a lot of large back lots
right.
on the north side of town.
Mhm. Thank you. I don't get
Yeah.
that.
So
Dennis had his hand up forever.
Oh,
Dan.
sorry, Dan.
No, that's okay. Great
Sandy's the
questions.
only one that can see you.
A couple of questions. I just wanted to clarify that target for 2030 for Rochester, the 50 to 70. Those are new units throughout the whole town and 55% of those in the village. New units.
Yes.
Additional units. I mean, it could be converting your house into 2 units, Dan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
turning
good.
1 to 2, 2
Yeah.
to 3.
And my second question,
Sorry.
the rural general and the rural conservation areas, would they have minimum sizes?
Yes, well, for lots, do you mean, or do you mean for housing? For the housing
No,
unit?
I mean, as a district, so to speak.
Like
to be
acreage
a-
for parcels?
To be a viable
As a zone.
forest-based piece of land, it needs to be a certain
Okay.
size.
Yes, so for these areas, we're trying to find clusters of similar uses in the area to determine the area, so. In rural general, it's your primarily smaller parcels, primarily residential. There could be ag, there could be some small bits of wetland or forest block. The ag and forestry, we're gonna have a clustering of ag uses, some forestry, some forest blocks, conservation, large clusterings of conserved, protected, or highest priority forest block lands. We don't want to have single parcels here and there that are a little different. We want to make sure that we have
Okay.
an area that makes sense given the largest use in the area.
Yeah, we're avoiding this, like what we call a checkerboard effect.
Yeah.
You know, and Kyle alluded to, you might have this large conservation area. There might be a rural conservation area. There might be a tiny 1 acre parcel in the middle of it. We're not taking that out just because it's 1 acre and it's residential. We're smoothing over that to allow for that consistency of the area. It's the area as a whole that's being mapped regionally. And when we get to looking at the map, as Kyle mentioned as well, it's a lot of these indicators kind of layered on top of each other. So you have these smaller, more fragmented parcels, that are more residential. We might also have a little of ag in the rural general. And then as you move out from there, you start to see, okay, now we have the rural agricultural and forestry. That often is in between the rural general and the rural conservation. It almost acts as like a buffer between the two. And often that's just the natural development pattern where you're getting less and less development the further out you go. And the further out you go, you get more farms, and then those farms gradually transition to forest. So, when we look at the map, I think
Yeah,
we'll
that'll
get a
explain
sense
that
of that.
One more question then.
Oh, sorry.
So, we'll have for the regional map, the rural general, rural conservation. So in our town zoning, we've got our own districts, conservation, residential, ag, residential. Will we be needing to revamp our districts and what can be done in those to match the new districts from the regional maps?
So with your zoning map, so this isn't a zoning map, we're just doing like a regional future land use planning. So for your zoning, you have total say as to what goes where, as long as the villages, we want, say roughly the same, that's just for the state designation village center, and the rural conservation to an extent are the areas that could be considered higher protection from a zoning perspective. But you have a lot more leeway when it comes to breaking up the rural general and the ag and forestry into different zones. You can have your own forest-based resource area. You can have your own names. It's really just the villages. You want to make sure that they would at least line up for the state designation reason. But the town zoning, this isn't affect town zoning, so you can have map as you wish.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
So great. Just going back to your Chelsea example, you identified areas of you know, for prospects for septic.
Yes.
Guess I was just curious what that was based on and, you know, I guess how much of a factor that really is since it's kind of site specific and can be engineered around.
It's just something we flag, with, when looking at the housing target. So with Chelsea, it didn't matter really because, you know, we're looking at a village that has existing wastewater and water. But for villages that don't have those, you know, we have soil layers that, depending on the soil type, it might be less suitable for septic. It's just something that we're keeping tabs on if we're saying, oh, this is a giant parcel. But the layer's kind of telling me that the whole parcel is crappy soil. Maybe we don't need to even think about this parcel.
So
Maybe
you
there are
looked at
plenty
the
of other.
USDA soil maps basically to judge that?
Yeah, our colleague Pete Fellows put the layer together, and it's just for, you know, putting together the housing targets. If we don't need to use a parcel that has bad, poor soil for septic, we'll just not worry about it. And it's easier to do that than say, well, it's bad soil, but you could put a raised septic system in there that could maybe put a unit or two. You know, that's not really within our wheelhouse, so to speak. So if we could avoid, and that's not to say we avoid it entirely, that's where we say, okay, what if there are 50% constraints on the parcel for whatever reason? We thought the soil was okay, but it's not. You know, we thought it could maybe fit 3 units, but it can only fit 1. Then trying to account for some unpredictability in the environment that, you know, we can't know everything. So trying to come up with that conservative estimate, based on, some of the, I think, most important indicators are, is it definitely too steep to build? Does the soil allow for, do we believe the soil allows for some septic suitability? And is it outside of a flood prone area?
Thank you.
Should we open them?
Questions?
So the maps are nice, but I'm still not understanding how that helps the housing issue. Because the issues around getting additional housing are less to do with knowing where to put it. And more to do with a variety of other issues.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to tie the two together a little bit.
Yeah. So in some cases, like in Bethel's case, in Brookfield's case, Rochester, that might require a new village center to be located somewhere that's outside of the existing village, but is still a settlement area. That could be densified, even if it doesn't have water or wastewater, we go by that 1 unit per acre. And then because you have zoning, you could zone it for purely residential, you could do with that as you will. But that's just to say, if it is not possible to have too much more infill or there's constraints, you could go elsewhere. And with the housing target, it'd be nice if the state would have more incentives, and unfortunately, we can't push state agenda in that way. But it's hopefully a guideline to think this is where housing could go if there were to be programs in the future, if there was a developer to come in. And that's more on the state side of things, but we make the maps so that if the state does do it, that's their, this is where we could invest in more housing. And then with the housing targets, I mean, and I understand the 50 to 70 is high for, so most towns are gonna have a number that isn't really feasible, but the hope is that if there is investment, we could reach it.
Well, the irony is the 50 or 70 is doable if you could free up the land that is buildable, which is mostly up in the hollows. By thinking of, call it 35 or 40, whatever the percentage is in the village here, 40 additional units.
55%.
Oh, 55. So, yeah, 40 units in the village here. I mean, it's constrained by floodplain. I mean,
Steep.
it's just,
Floodplain, steep slopes,
And
and people that don't wanna
It
get rid of their
existing
land.
infrastructure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe
that's-
looking at the map will help
Yeah.
clarify.
We'll roll up the
'cause-
map
Yeah.
now, and then we'll.
Yeah,
Uh,
we'll be interested to see your map because we have, we're kind of defined by these two rivers of the, the brooks that, there's a brook at the north and south end of the village, and that's it, that's the village.
Yes.
And then we have the river, and then we have so.
Don't forget what village we have right now,
Put 50 units.
and what village we have right now sits on a little hill in the middle of this.
I'll unroll the paper map. And we can put a digital one online.
I will say, I applaud the thought that is going into this as a hopefully longtime resident of
Well, then you
Rochester.
need to take in consideration of the homeowners that don't want anything to do with more.
I was
Right,
just gonna say, the land that we know would
They aren't gonna sell
potentially
anything.
be buildable
Right.
is
So-
not gonna be released.
the cultural. impacts,
So
right?
we'll start with your existing regional utilities. So this is zoom in from our sort of map of the website. So this is what it looks like now in Rochester. Start with that and then we'll move to.
You guys are definitely the map people.
Yeah, so there's
Here we are.
your forest-based resource is this greenish, and then your village is right there, and then rural general was everything else, yeah. Ready for this one? That's the new one, for the proposed draft.
Nobody reach over the map, please.
Well, that's the new proposed
This is the
one.
proposed draft. This is the old one. This is the proposed draft.
Ah.
You can compare side by side.
So everything in blue is what they're. recommending.
Blue is the ag and forest.
No, I
The
get that.
clear
Yeah.
is the rural general, and then the green is your,
So everything green is untouchable.
for an Act 250. If it's, you need an Act 250 permit,
Well, we haven't really abandoned the rules for that yet.
yeah. That'll just follow our resource base, which is a 10 acre per unit. It's,
And
this
this,
is the same, I just had two.
sorry.
Council gets an inset?
So Talkville
That's where I live, man.
is our solution to the housing.
Get out of here. Nobody can have it. No, I don't want it.
I'm gonna take a
But that's
picture.
why,
if that's
where
okay.
there's a lot more. open
Yeah,
space.
there is.
And that's kind of where we're thinking more of the housing.
Oh, it's
Final
across
file.
the other side.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we did run into the capacity in the Rochester Village.
No,
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
well, we sit on a hill, everything, well, over here, I guess.
I am,
looking at this
I
the
am
right way. Is it
surprised that-
floodplain?
This is Tunnel Ridge.
So you're not showing the floodplain on these maps because Tugville's a lot of flood.
Talkville, we designed around.
Yeah.
There's small amount of space down. Again, the landowners need to be convinced that.
Because the river's here, so this part's all floodplain here. And then this is floodplain, but there's already houses there. So it's mostly these
We're
plots here. we're
including
looking at.
development that's already in the floodplain, because it's already
Slide.
developed and
Yeah.
extensive.
Yeah, so it's like
But.
basically getting people.
Safe deal.
We can extend.
Well,
All of ours is preserved.
So this is all floodplain, all of this is floodplain. So there may be
Yes.
houses, there may be houses here, but some of them are illegal or you're, what do you call it, pre-existing.
Yes.
But we can't, but if you came to us today and said, I want to put a house there, we'd tell you you couldn't do that.
And because you have the floodplain
Yes.
regulations, you
Yes.
would, so because you have that, the actual regulation. Putting it to parcel line to make it a bit more fluid as a map is fine.
Yeah,
That's where we're thinking. We couldn't move that
but we're
green
not
line over.
accounting for that area for how.
Yeah, we didn't, that didn't go into the housing target.
Yeah.
The
We're
red.
looking at these down here, a little bit up here, down there, and then Talkville. You'll see your highlands, your larger plots,
Then why is this red?
because the
It's
we're
Cody's
putting the
sugar
parcel
house.
lines on our mapping.
It's
just to
not
make
even
it-
on there. That's just
make
his
more
garage.
sense.
He's got a new sugar house right
Um,
there now.
We could move this if you
Bowen.
want us to move it to this line.
I think it needs to
Bowen, right?
reflect what's actually.
Yeah, that's his garage. He's got a sugar house.
If, if we have flood regulations that say you can't build there, then having a map that says this is where we see the village expanding seems inconsistent to me.
Well, currently, the flood regulations allow for new development in the flood zone.
Not homes.
Yeah, they're conditional use. Which it's
and-
not prohibited.
I mean, based on what this town went through and Irene, we don't want to encourage that.
Yeah.
Still,
Right.
But
still
what I'm
houses,
saying is
you know,
it's
still
not
like in
prohibited
Bangladesh.
Like in
by
Thailand, yeah.
regulation, So.
I
and
mean,
most-
that's arguing where the 100-year floodplain should be. That's really what you're arguing there, right? Because at the end of the day, some say Irene set the new 100-year floodplain.
But that being said, I mean, we didn't look at these plots for building housing for the housing targets. Those did not come into play.
Yeah.
But that might be the emotional reaction you're
I
experiencing
understand.
right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will take note of it. We'll
Truly,
definitely
yeah.
think about
Like,
taking it out.
As I
We wanna
heard,
take care of our
as
people.
I heard the presentation, you're telling us that this is where our village can expand. Where does village expand? This is where it expands. Well, I think we need to reflect the actual limitations that we have on that expansion.
This is the area in which you believe our greatest density
Should
should
be.
grow.
Yes.
Right. And that,
Well, that's a lot of encouragement to people who already own that land to create new units on their space.
it involves the school too,
And
and the fields. And
another thing
If we
with
go
the,
up,
with the housing units is we're not looking at the potential for like pretty more density in current structures. You know, there's a ton of potential for single family homes to fit in ADUs. Now, if all the single family homes did that, you would double the number of units.
Where are you looking?
In Rochester.
Nancy Ward's
Everyone-
backyard.
yeah,
Yeah, there's plenty of, that was like our larger lots down there. yeah.
Well, that's
That's
the
not-
old
that's
wheat
not
field.
consideration
I mean,
we were
it's,
looking at. We were just like,
it's
is there
sloped, but it's
open
not
land?
There-
unbuildable.
and it's a good question. It really is a good
that the
question
school?
and
The
good
school's
to
right
have
there,
in
correct.
mind.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
50
all
years
floodplain.
in the
Yep.
future, I mean,
And we
20 years in
can-
the future.
And this is just
Yeah.
a draft map. We
When
can pull that
people
back.
come to them
Make it all real
they-
concept.
I think this is too.
with. it
Where's the
getting
school right
older.
here?
This shaded here is the building.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Where
when
will
they
they
did the
stay? Where will they
repurposing,
build?
they couldn't
And
put
where
anything
can they-
residential in that school building
Is the
because of the flood.
Was it just the
village,
shop space
is that
and
due
the
to the
auditorium?
consideration for
Yeah, I think.
families and folks? that
Yeah,
would-
so that's just
May
the
not
end of
have
that building
Yeah,
right there.
you might be right too.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
just. the little-
It's one of the state.
Yeah, 'cause
planning-
we-
Yeah, because the rest of it's elevated slightly
Making
more.
packed village center.
So I think the challenge you have in Rochester
Part of it
is
is
people with large
it's
lots
sort
aren't
of
interested
like
in,
the village
zero
is-
interest in developing.
Another thing
Well,
though that could be taken into account.
Hundreds, people weren't
The state-
traveling. in
the statute,
cars. They were
every
getting
single family
places
home
on
Yeah.
foot, or
townwide
they had a
can
horse.
become a duplex.
Right.
That's
So
now
you're
allowed.
not
So
traveling
even if that
crazy.
happened, you could easily get the town.
Yeah, you could hit the numbers.
If that
Yeah,
were,
you know,
yeah.
so it doesn't
Yeah.
always require
I
new
mean, this,
buildings. It could
this,
be-
this is included obviously because it's a parcel. Yes, but we know that the base of the mountain starts right there and goes right through there and right around there. So this whole section is completely, and that's a commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andy, I just want to do a time check and a process.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Dan.
Yeah,
Hi, Dan.
and we have Jeff Gephardt waiting too.
Just
Yeah,
a process
we had
check
to go
for
a lot of-
Kyle
lot
and
of-
Kyle.
Valley.
Yes, we definitely understand that.
Subtracting.
I think we're done.
It took us a while to crunch the numbers to see how you could even reach those numbers.
We're all able to see.
It took us, yeah, it was like a day, a full day.
Did he have more of his presentation?
So that, are you, is this, do we get to keep the paper copies or are you taking
Yes.
those away?
That's awesome.
The current regional future land use map zoomed in on Rochester and the proposed draft.
Okay.
And then if you want to have to mark it up by a Sharpie, take a picture of it, send it to me, I'll give you my card.
Kyle, do we have a timeline on when we can provide comments?
You're welcome. So yeah, we are hoping
One,
to
two,
have these
three.
completed. I mean, they has to be approved by the end of next year.
Correct.
If these can be done with comments from the towns by the end of this year or early next year, if the meetings, second meeting is required. We, early next year is kind of our hope. So like by this time next year. So you have like a full 12 months.
But we hope you don't forget about it until
Oh,
then.
Yes, sooner is possible,
Yeah.
Way too
better,
exciting.
but again, if you want a second meeting, and early next year works, there's still that, flexibility. And
And
we
we
send that
can-
timeline to you,
Yeah.
just so you know.
Your
We can
Burns
send
in
the
the blue.
digital, the PDF as well.
Meeting
Yes,
water.
you have that,
Yeah.
as well.
Yes, please.
After,
map.
after that, next year, then do you plan, I forget what the timeline said, do you plan some public meetings throughout the region or?
Yes,
Okay,
that's just for our, updating our regional plan with the future land use chapter. We'll have some public, forums.
Okay.
For that purpose as well. And the map will be included, obviously, as the map that goes along with the chapter.
What's that?
That's a school.
That'll be, yeah, next.
Oh,
school
looking at it
right there.
upside down, yeah,
that's
okay.
school right
okay,
Oh,
thank
sure.
you.
there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oh,
Was that
are
it for
there-
your
is there-
presentation?
Yeah.
Is there any other questions or comments?
Hey, no,
Great, thank you.
very well done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, moving on in our agenda. I want to thank Jeff for hanging on.
Thank you, Jeff.
He's still here. Is he?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you for your
There's,
patience.
there's actually one thing relative to the first topic and the flooding and the elevating houses that came back to my mind. After Irene, I was asked to go down to Pittsfield by Efficiency Vermont. There wasn't any other way to get there. So I went down and I sat next to a guy from FEMA, a very senior person in their, contingent in the valley. And he was asked about elevating houses, and he said that his line was something like, yeah, you'll have a much nicer view to fall into the river from. And ultimately, the way that flood happened, of course, it came barreling down the mountain, and a lot of violence and a lot of rocks being used, to change its path. A flood like on the Mississippi River, it happens very slowly and then takes a long time to drain back out. And in that instance, the elevation of the house or the building can work. But his opinion was that putting it on stilts in our valley wouldn't help us all that much. So,
Take a pretty substantial footing to hold something in place, yeah.
yeah. So I somehow have, okay, now I can see my screen. I just wanted to have what I sent out available for people to see and respond or question about, and then for me to have that as well, so I can see the picture and what you're referring to. In any case, what has happened is that I've been contacted 2 or 3 times by local folks saying that somebody they know needed to use the charging station, and they were frightened about being in the dark down in the lot at the end of town. And General Green Mountain Power has been receiving contacts like that as well. They picked up the phone and called me, and they thought that we should put our heads together about something to do with that. It was kind of implied that Rochester ought to be the one doing that. So I pointed out to Mr. Casey at GMP that they are the ones that collect the revenue from its operation. Rochester has provided the property, and GMP owns everything else there. So they didn't take too long reflecting on that to adopt that approach to it. But they have, again, been receiving contacts direct to them with the same concern. I don't know whether people have up on the screen that photo that shows the flow charger from the back and the new fire department in front of it. There are actually 4 poles in that view space, and it's the one farthest to the north. They call it a blonde pole.
So Jeff, we have nothing. Are you trying to give us a document?
In the email that I sent out a couple of days ago, anyway, I think.
So some of us don't have our email with us. We're gonna see if we can find it.
We have had good usage of it, certainly, and it's a fast charger, which is less common than level 2 chargers. Takes about 30-40 minutes to get a charge into a car there.
So we're talking about putting in a light. That's the issue.
Yep.
Where's the closest existing streetlight, Jeff?
It would be off the photo to the left.
So
There's one.
Right there.
I think it's on either side
oh,
of the,
Yeah, there's one right over the flow sign, top left. And
Yeah.
then there are 3 to the right. And the farthest one to the right or to the north is the one that Zach Casey is suggesting would be the best one to locate it on. There's no low voltage or residential voltage at anywhere on that site. And so a bollard light or something down close to the chargers themselves, they don't have the ability to get the line down there unless they excavate and put another transformer in, I suppose. And I've been asking about how we suspect that the lighting is going to be visible from is it Robinson Road back behind there?
Robinson Drive. Yeah.
Drive, yeah. And Zach has put 2 options together, and it's the second option that he's suggesting is the one he thinks can handle lighting the parking lot, but as he put it, won't be overdone. It also would be at a bit of an angle to Robinson Drive, which might also make it a little less obtrusive. The lighting to the lighting going on the poles to the left is not going to be very functional in the summertime when the leaves on those trees are out. So the lighting to the right, and the closest one to the right is that blonde one, the lighter one on the far right.
And that's gonna, you feel, generate enough light to make a difference?
That's what I'm being told from GMP. I think, I get a sense that they will put it in, and if it doesn't work, they're going to want to have something that works. They don't want people nervous and fretting about using the charging.
So the option would be to set a pole and put a security light right in the parking lot or where the chargers are.
No, what they're proposing is putting the light on that blonde pole.
No, I understand that, but if it didn't work, that would be the alternative.
Okay, yeah.
That's
Expensive.
well, the select board, do you want to add another light to your streetlight account?
No, this would not be on the town account. This would be on Green Mountain Power's dime.
Well,
We paid for 47 of them right now, so no, we don't want to add another light.
so why don't we just do it?
So, well, I was talking to Pat about this earlier, that the concern is where the spill is gonna be
Right.
for the neighbors.
Right.
Mm.
And if it's pointed towards Robinson Drive, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah,
At least.
at least.
I think Ed and Burma would like that much,
No,
shining in their window.
Absolutely not. So could it, well, could a guard be put up?
They can shade them.
Put it. But it's gonna be, it's pretty far away from,
In order, well, that's my point. In order to
Yeah.
get the light into, you have to aim it toward there anyway. I mean. I mean, and
Yeah,
they
what
don't
he
have-
put, what he put down on the preferred option
Yeah.
is installing a regular street light, non-flood, like the ones on Main Street, facing
Right.
the parking lot that shines down toward the ground. That may also work. It will give some illumination to the parking lot, but not overdone. These street lights come in many sizes, but a mid-size 30-watt LED would work in GMP's opinion.
yeah, I would agree. I would agree. It's gonna be no more objectionable than the other lights up and down Main Street,
Yeah.
which are near residential properties.
So what needs to happen? Do we have to
Good.
vote on it or?
Do a butters have to
Well,
be?
we get involved in
I was gonna
streetlight
say, we
placement.
wouldn't.
It's not us.
Right, it's not us.
Oh, that's okay.
It's all yours, Patty.
Good luck.
Well, I think that did we have a light there at one time, Jeff? And there was a complaint and that light was turned off or taken down?
If I have the story right,
Yeah, it's
the back of the flow chargers, that is a globe, so to speak, for a light. And there was objection to that, and they somehow have cut that free or put something in the back of it to prevent that light from shining.
A globe as in 360-degree light.
I don't know.
No, more like an old gas station
Dome light.
fuel pump, you know.
If they didn't like that.
Coming off the actual charging fixture,
Oh,
not up in the air, yeah.
Hmm.
Sounds good.
not being.
Try it. If you
electrified yet,
get
I
a
haven't
complaint, you
used
have to take
so-
it down, try something different.
And I won't be.
That's all they can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's. Those medium watt lights don't. Provide a huge cone. But if they think it's gonna work, it will add light to the area, but it may not be as much as some people would like.
Well, maybe it won't be so. Did not
Really
just
think
be
it was
a-
that dark down
Right,
there, but-
maybe that there's already some lamps
No.
there, just adding,
Part of it.
gradually
I thought there was a
adding will
light
be
right by the fire department.
less,
I guess.
of, you know,
too.
gradually adding light
Fire-
will not be as so much of a shock to the residents too. So.
So
But
this is,
We were
This-
thinking about the possibility of a motion light, but that seemed to be shot down because having a lighted area like that all the time, people could congregate there or whatever, it was suggested. And so we were just thinking maybe a motion light when somebody does need to come in and use the charging station, but I don't think Green Mountain Power is into that. They said they don't have that technology. I said the
Well, they
hardware
do,
store does.
I don't know, I would find a light that popped on and
After
off
they-
more annoying than one that was just always on.
Exactly.
I know, whatever we come up with, there's going to be an issue with someone somewhere, yeah.
Yep.
Always is.
do we want to reach out to the neighbors then? And at least acknowledge that there might be some issues and just let them know that we're planning to do this and ask for their input? Because we're
My
gonna,
prediction, you put a light up there and don't tell them, they won't even notice. As Soon as you tell
Yeah.
them, they'll notice. Yeah,
I think it's gonna be hard to describe the impact until it's in place.
It'd be impossible.
Yep,
mean,
I think that, yeah, you're right, Sandy. It's how is it aimed and how is it bright enough? Is it too bright? I mean, I fully believe GMP wants to do this properly so that if the first plan doesn't work, they're gonna look for a plan B.
Which is great.
Greg, is it just a matter of brighter bulb? Or is it a whole different light setup?
It's a new light, it's a new light.
Right, but
on-
should it be
Oh.
not sufficient? Is it just a
Oh.
matter
No,
of?
yeah, they could try a brighter light, a
Okay.
higher wattage light. I mean, ideally, if you really want to light that space, you should have a pole on that side of the road
Yeah.
and, a 30-foot pole, a shorter pole, and then light the space, but
From the back towards the road?
yeah.
It sounds
But
like
I
we're
think-
moving towards moving forward with it and seeing how it works and what kind of feedback we get. Green Mountain Power seems to be willing to do what the right thing there, so move forward with it. And any objections? I mean, we don't have to vote on it, it's not our purview, but we're just providing some feedback to the select board.
Sounds good.
Go Patty, go.
Pat, do you have something to add?
Well, I just wanted to say what 2.8 says in our bylaws about glare, lights and reflection. No glare, light or reflection shall be permitted, which has an undue adverse impact on other property owners or tenants, or which could incur the vision of a driver of any motor vehicle, or which is detrimental to public health, safety and welfare. That's it. That's all we have there.
And that is very specifically for conditional uses.
Which this is not.
For someone who comes to us for a conditional use permit.
Okay, and that's not what Green Mountain Power is doing, just so that I know how to address it.
No, it's not what they're doing.
Okay,
What is can you explain that? I'm not sure I follow.
If you, Jeff, if you wanted to have a sawmill on your property, you would have to get a conditional use permit for use of your property. And we have a whole process that we go through. And that, and there's a whole page of conditions, and the glare is one of them.
Thank you.
okay, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And thank you, Jeff, for being the front man for the town on this.
No, no problem. I'll put my landline forwarded to you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Good night all.
Right, next on the agenda is our minutes from our February meeting, March meeting.
I move to approve them.
There needs to be an amendment. The light that was discussed, it was written as for the village grocery store instead of the gas station. So it was labeled wrong.
It's called Cinch's Place.
Right, but,
Things.
but the minutes had it as for the village grocery and liquor store, which
Oh.
is the wrong,
Okay.
Good catch.
that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm here to read the
Preemptive.
minutes,
That's embarrassing because I actually read this. Okay,
unless I read it wrong, but,
I'll look at it.
okay.
All right.
Other than that,
That amendment?
As amended, I second.
check it, yeah, second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all opposed? Looks like we've got them. Thank you, Sandy, for writing those.
No, I didn't write them. Mary wrote them and I improperly proved.
Oh, okay.
Improper proof? That's a mouthful.
Pat, do you have some report outs?
Well, I actually don't have any new building permits. It seems as though spring has not yet sprung. I will not be at the May meeting, so I will fill you in on the last 2 weeks of April. The first 2 weeks of April, I'm leaving mid-April. So I won't be here for the May meeting as well, but I'll give you up to date on that point. I just kind of have a quick little story. I was approached as the zoning administrator with questions about someone that was looking to buy the property that is like next to Waltz Way on Route 73. it does have an approved septic system way up by the road, but this person wanted to build down in the floodway. A vacation home on stilts, and we had quite a little conversation about how that's really not a good idea. And I said, it's really not about the water that comes down. During Irene, there was a firewood processing plant up the road, and all the firewood came down the river at that point in that area. And, did a lot of damage along the way. So you would have things in the water. And then I also cited to him that we had just recently gone through an ice jam-ish situation. So I don't know that your house would win in a floodway against an ice jam. But nonetheless, I ended up referring him to an engineer. Because if he wanted to get an exception to no building in floodway, he needs to cite everything with an engineer, and I'm sure that the engineer would have said, I referred him to Cricket. I don't know if they ever hooked up, but there's not a lot of premium land for sale nowadays, and out of town realtors are just kind of selling to out of staters sight unseen because it sounds like a good deal, and it almost sounds like a swamp in Florida to me. Also, I'm expecting to possibly be hearing from the new owner of Tupper Ledges. The actual Tupper Ledges has sold. And of course, we would expect the rope swing and everything to be in the floodplain there. There's very little land there that's not in the floodway. So
across down, okay.
actual Tupper Ledges, not where the hotel, not where the inn was.
Yeah,
Across.
but down the field piece. there.
Across the road.
Yeah, $89,000. So.
Are you kidding me?
I am not kidding you, and it sold quickly. So it wasn't this realtor. So
You
yes,
used it.
we have to keep our eyes open for these what I call land crumbs. The crumbs are being sold and they're being pictured as, prime land. And so we'll keep our eyes open for those developments as well. That's it for me.
What's
you.
that, 20 acres of land? In the floodplain.
Thanks, Pat. Next on the agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone?
Deb Moore.
Hi, Deb.
Okay, hi, just unmuted myself. Hi, so I have essentially a procedural question, so this should be quick. I'm Deb Moore. I live in Rochester. I'm also a member of the Rochester Citizens Housing Committee, but I'm representing myself here, not the Housing Committee. Because of my personal experience of not being able to find an affordable house in the 8 years I've lived here, and being very aware that short-term rentals such as Airbnbs seem to be a part of the problem, I've had an interest in the housing situation here. The Housing Committee is dealing with gathering some stats on housing, and it seems that to date, Rochester has no policy or even any basic stats on how many short-term rental units there actually are in this town. This seems like basic information any town with a housing shortage should have, and that perhaps some policy should be put in place. Other Vermont towns have been dealing with this same issue and have initiated various policies. So my question to you is this something that the planning and zoning board would take up, or is this something that the select board should take up, or would it be somehow a combination of the two? I personally believe that short-term rentals are an elephant in the room in Rochester that really must be acknowledged and addressed. So who puts it, I'm sorry, I'm ignorant about this. Who puts it on whose agenda for discussion? So any guidance here would be most welcome. Thanks very much. I'm done.
I
Thanks,
believe
Deb.
there,
We're thinking.
did we, I think in our recent zoning bylaw review and revision, we did have a I think it was in the conservation residential area, that short-term rentals were a conditional use. Am I remembering that correctly, other members?
Yes, that is correct.
We do not have that. We talked about it. We did not work or address that issue for other parts of the town. So, other thoughts from folks?
I think where that information, where you would get that, through the town clerk?
Well, I talked with Julie about it today, and she said there is nothing, there's no, someone actually asked her for a list of the short-term rental units, and she had no answer for them because there's nothing, there's no way, there's no policy in place about, it, not only no regulation, but even, just, counting how many there are, there's just nothing.
Well, I believe we heard today that Gordon Merrill, who used to have rental apartments and then switched them all to Airbnb, is now back to rental apartments. I think it's something that owners just do from
Yeah.
1 month to the next.
There's no registration process to put your house up as an Airbnb.
Well,
There's criteria for that. I mean,
Well, no,
or a mandatory thing that you have.
there's no reporting you have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
There
So
is,
I'm. Go ahead, Dan, you know more about this than probably all of it.
I was gonna say, there is an organization that has a database of short-term rentals. And they have offered that service to the town. At the time we were doing our zoning, it was not something that we were looking at doing, so we did not avail ourselves of that data.
It's not free.
Right.
The people who wrote to us were trying to sell us a service.
So they go and mine all the Verbo Airbnb sites. You could get the data. And that's probably what they're selling you is mine data off those sites.
right. Deb Matthews told me that AirDNA is the place to go that might have information about, I think, not just Rochester, but possibly also, Granville and Hancock. So it still wouldn't tell us exactly how many units are here in Rochester. And so, it just seems to me that it's kind of a basic thing that could be put in place if there's properties are changing hands, that, you just ask what's the purpose for it, Somehow it just seems that it's really lacking to not know when we're having such a huge shortage of housing, what it's just really lacking to not know how many Airbnbs there are. I mean, what's happening, in fact, because believe me, I've been paying a lot of attention to this for a lot of years. What's happening is something will go on the market and it'll get snatched up in a minute by someone from out of state, and suddenly it's an Airbnb, and that's it. Sight unseen, they'll just buy it up. That was, of course, happening a lot during COVID, and now maybe that's settled down, but it's still the principle that this is happening, this is going on. And it just seems the town should have some kind of handle on it.
Well, I think I'm familiar with a few up in Hawk. They're actually second homes for people, but they're not up there 52 weeks a year. So when they're not there, they're Airbnb-ing it. So it starts as a vacation home.
Right.
And they're just.
Well, I mean, we can't enforce or deny the sale of a property to an individual, and we can't dictate what they do with it, so,
But we could ask them to register
Somebody could.
if they decided that month they wanted to.
but there are rules.
Then next month they don't want to do it, so it changes monthly.
Then,
It's
yeah,
be impossible to.
Well, it
Mm,
seems that, I mean, there are variety of variety of things that, I mean, other towns are looking at as well, which is, I mean, if a property is bought for the purpose, especially if a property is bought for the purpose of short-term rental, there could be, you know, some kind of special taxes on it, permits, a special permit. It's also, think about it, it's also, well, in theory, at least, I'm not sure if that would be the case here in Rochester, but in theory, it could, oh, well, I don't know, Huntington House, maybe there was a problem there with, you know, competition with Airbnb. People go to Airbnbs, they're not gonna go to the town hotel, that kind of thing. So it just makes sense to do something about this. At the very, very least, just know how many, what we're dealing with here. So my question was, if we want to really look into this, you know, who is it the purview of the planning committee or the select board or both, or how does this get discussed? How does it come to light, you know?
Did we just put a limit on how many days they can do that in our latest? I thought we did.
No, we just defined it.
Oh,
Yeah.
We did talk about the possibility of what it would look like if we said, all right, we only want X number of short-term rentals in the town. And we thought that there would be some, we didn't think that was a good idea. We didn't think that it would stand up in court if someone wanted to
Mhm.
wanted, was,
Exercise their right to do what they want with their property.
right.
yeah,
Well,
but
you-
there are towns that are doing, I don't know whether they're ordinances by the select board or where they're coming from. Woodstock is an example.
That's right.
Yeah,
And they have full-time employees who
Paid.
administer those.
yes.
This town has volunteers.
Right.
Deb, one source of information you might try, when we had our housing and contractors workshop, gosh, forget when that was, several months ago, if not a year ago. Kirk White was there, and we talked with him, I talked with him about this issue, and he had data for basically his area, his area he represents.
Right.
I don't know where he got that data or how, whether there's a database that he has access to that he could provide you that information.
It seems to me the only place, I can't imagine how he got that unless he got it off the websites, that like the Airbnb website, and there's other ones too. You know, I guess somebody can call that information from that. Um, but it just seems, in order to protect itself, that the town of Rochester should have some idea of actually what's going on. I mean, everybody's going, we're all, you know, I'm on this housing committee, and housing is a big problem. It's a big, big problem. It's affecting the businesses because people can't have no place to stay. You know, it's a real issue. So I would, and if Airbnbs, especially the ones that come from out of town, you know, like I said, people just buying properties sight unseen, then they're suddenly Airbnbs. That that has to count, you know, it has to be significant towards the problem. So I just think we're a little town, I know, but somehow or another, I think it needs to be addressed.
I would recommend that the housing committee move on this. Sounds like it's right up the alley of what you're looking at, is the availability and how our housing is being used, and use whatever resources Kirk White has to figure out to get that data. I'm pretty sure he didn't go through the Airbnb website and count all the places in the area he represents. So he's got some access to some database, or he did at the time. There's a lot of speculation too about what was out there. So it would be good to have the data.
Kat,
There's two places that you can get that data from. One is more reliable than the other, but all of the Airbnbs through Airbnb or Vrbo are required to pay meals and rooms tax. So they're all registered with the Vermont Department of Taxes. Even if somebody rents their own home by using Airbnb, Airbnb charges those taxes and pays the state that 9% meals and rooms tax. So there is a database that you can address for a short-term meals and rooms tax, and they just have to put in the parameters that it's not a bed and breakfast or a motel, and they're gonna get that. The other places, all of the Airbnbs or all of the short-term rentals are supposed to be certified for fire safety. They have to be inspected for proper egress. You cannot take a basement room with a small tiny window and make it into a bedroom. It has to conform to all the fire safety rules. I'm not saying that that's the most reliable place to go get your list, because there are several that have probably not done that. So it wouldn't as be a conclusive list as it was for the meals and rooms taxes. Anybody that goes and does their taxes, their accountant is going to tell them if they're making rental income, they have to register with the state of Vermont. So that is pretty well enforced. As far as an opinion from me about short-term rentals, let's take a look at a Hawk House. A Hawk House is a furnished house with TV service, internet service, phone service. It's got all the services. It's turnkey, ready to go. That is typically not the rental that Deb is looking for. That would be a rental that would be in excess of $2,000 a month, because it is fully furnished and fully equipped and has all the utilities. So that is not really a viable source of saying, okay, you have to rent it out to long term and take all your furniture out and disconnect the internet. But within the village, we've lost a lot of apartments to Airbnbs, and that should be a situation where, if there was anything to be looked at, would be that, because those apartments are the ones that the blue collar people would be looking to rent. Smaller 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, efficiency apartments. Those are our waitresses and mechanics and things. So I think categorically, there's one argument, and categorically, there's no argument at all. That's my opinion.
Well, I think you're exactly right about the rental units. I personally have been looking for a house for actually 10 years, for 2 years before I came here. And I was lucky enough to get a really good rental, but I still want a house. And now I have a partner and we're looking for a house. And they're just not available. And the reason that I'm not, and there's a particular house I was hoping to get, and I could have afforded it when I came here. And the guy who owned it died and gave it to his children, and they don't live there in that home. But it's a well-established Airbnb, and then there was another one that a similar thing, a smaller house. I could have afforded it and it was gone. And I'm aware of houses that in the area that are just boom, just one after another. They've become Airbnbs. And it's very frustrating, Of course, there's all this other stuff since in the 8 years I've been here, of course, the prices have gone just out of sight. So that's sort of another issue. But in a way, it's sort of the same thing. People from out of state coming in and buying up these things at spectacular prices. So, there's just something about that doesn't feel right. That there should be some kind of controls over it.
Any other thoughts on that for Deb? I had recommendation that the housing committee look more at it and use resources from Pat suggested a couple of resources. And our representative, Kirk Wright, is interested in this topic, and he has resources. Any other thoughts for Deb?
Well,
I think about registering, you know, if you have say if we can't get someone with an apartment or a unit to register if they have short-term tenants, what if we asked folks that have long-term tenants to register, right? And we think about incentives and even financial incentives, like what can we get from the state? What's the town willing to offer? In order to, I know, right? In order to help make it a pretty option for people who have those apartments. That's what I would suggest, Deb.
That's good. I like that. Mhm.
You know, if you don't want to see a certain behavior, you reward the behavior you want to see.
Yeah, yeah. What about something just as simple as when a house is sold, to just ask, you know, or, I mean, because I think you already do say, is this right? Full-time residence or a second home, right? You know that much. So if it's a second home, it's like, and will you be, you know, do you have plans to be, you know, turn into a short-term rental? You know, just that kind of thing, to get some idea, at least with new homes, you know, turnovers.
The other thing, Deb, and this won't be popular, but it is an option of increasing the taxes even more on second homes.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
it is an option. That's
Right.
right.
We'll just
They
charge
already do.
more for their Airbnbs.
They sure will.
I like that idea.
Who would collect that data from a buyer of a house?
Isn't that done? I mean, how do you do it with taxes anyway? I mean, isn't it like the town clerk thing when houses are transferred, right?
That's,
There's a whole list in the back of the town report.
They probably aren't gonna say what they're gonna use their house for.
So they use their house for 2 weeks. Is that a house sole purpose is Airbnb? I mean, short-term rentals have been around forever. The Hawk houses have been short-term rental forever.
Mhm.
It's just Airbnb is a mechanism. It's
Right.
done. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's.
It's the time we live in.
Yeah, I agree it's an issue, but I'm not sure I'm just trying to see the value of registration or finding out what they're gonna use it for. What are we gonna do with the data? In particular, if the data is available much simpler through just the methods that Patty described. I'm not, are we gonna tell them, well, I guess.
We can't tell
because,
them they can't do it.
You know,
Right,
to
yeah.
collect higher taxes, to have a limit, all those things require political
How about
process.
How about permits?
You have,
again, it's.
what do you
if
mean
people
permits?
Report it, so it's. I mean, there's the homestead, right? You can declare a homestead. If someone is not declaring a homestead for that particular property. Because it's a second property, then. Do a higher tax. Easy, it's already in the system. It's already a system that we use.
But to change tax laws requires legislative action.
True. This is true.
Uh,
So there you go. Deb.
The legislature has talked about this. I don't know if there's anything that's moving on it right now, but it is a statewide, well, more than statewide issue, but
That's right.
so that's another reason to contact Kirk White is what's moving forward with some of the proposed legislation that around this issue.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I don't, the personal opinion, I don't think Airbnbs are the primary reason we have a housing shortage. There's so many other things involved in that. You know, I do think it impacts people who are looking for long-term rentals. I would agree with that. But the housing shortage
Or
is being created by a lot of other dynamics. It's just a personal opinion.
Well, as I said, I agree with you that there's a lot of dynamics going on, but I know from my own personal, I mean, observation, I've been looking at this for at least the 8 years I've been here. it's a huge, it's a much bigger, that's why I'm saying if we had any kind of real stats about what's happening here in Rochester, then you could say, oh, see, it's not an issue or not that much of an issue, or you could say it's a huge issue. It makes a difference, I think, in how we need to approach the whole housing issue.
Agree. I agree.
So, Deb, we made, giving you some ideas and some suggestions. I think that's as far as we're gonna
Okay,
go tonight.
yeah, I appreciate it. Great. Okay, so I'll work with the housing committee and then, you know, maybe we'll be coming back to planning or select board or both.
Yeah, yeah, maybe both. I'm not sure where it sits. If there's an ordinance like Woodstock has done, that would be a select board. If
Okay,
it's zoning, it would be planning commission.
okay.
So,
All righty. Well, thanks so much. I didn't think it would take this much time, but I appreciate the time. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you,
thanks,
Deb.
have a good night.
Right.
Good night.
Any other public comment? Anyone in the room? I can't see it.
Not in our room.
Mr. only
Mr.
Mr. Orca.
Is there anyone in the?
I'm
in
gonna
the
make,
Zoom room?
I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
I'm in a second.
Oh, all in favor.
Bye.
Aye.
Hey, Dan,